Hello, welcome to Self-Generated. My name is Steve. I am the host and creator of this podcast, and you've come across the second official episode. That's 2 of 3 that'll be available at launch. And in case you missed it, there was an intro episode that I described who I was, why I'm doing this. The short version is I'm just a regular guy. I don't have any special academic accreditation or any special knowledge, but I am going to be discussing a scientific framework that's been around for a little bit that universally explains how consciousness, or at least how our actions, our thoughts, our behaviors come about. What's the purpose? What's the meaning? What's emotions? What are beliefs? What are actions? And my understanding of this information and implementing it into my life fundamentally changed me. I went from a raging alcoholic and a grade A asshole to a grade C asshole. I'm just kidding. It fundamentally changed me for the better. I went from being borderline crippled to being able to be loving, compassionate, functional, helpful, capable again. Not super capable, not ridiculously capable, but more so than I had ever been. And it was not overnight. It was not flipping a switch. It's not some cure. It's always a work in progress. But fundamentally, the basic idea, the notion was that my understanding and changing the understanding of how I worked, what my emotions are, how my perceptions worked, what these things I were going through and how I could alter my feelings, what I could do about them through this actual knowledge changed my life. And what I'm trying to do is share this information, because active inference, predictive processing, there's info out there. Feel free to pause for a second, go take a look. Put it in YouTube or Google, active inference, free energy principle, predictive processing. You'll find video after video, abstracts, articles, books. You'll see Andy Clark, Anil Seth, Lisa Feldman Barrett, Carl Friston, all these named scientists and many, many more. You'll see titles like his Perception of Controlled Hallucination, and so forth and so on. There's no lack of content out there that explores this idea. And there's new information coming out all the time, new studies. But that's not really helpful to you or I. The reason being is if you took a moment and you went and looked, unless you're already initiated to this stuff, if you try to watch one of these videos or read one of these papers, it might as well, for most people, the average person, be in a foreign language. They might as well be doing the actual math that they're referring to live in person, because most people are not going to get it. They're not going to be interested. It does not come across. I understand the need for a dense academic language, that these are very particular notions, that the language has to be very particular about it. They're still exploring it. I get that. But another aspect of this is this genuinely could explain how everyday people work. And I feel that it's a huge game changer to what we think and how we think it works now. And it should be, if it's true, understandable for everyday people. It should be, if it really is real, everyday people should in some way, shape, or form be able to see the fingerprints of it. And that's what the whole point of this podcast is that this idea, I can only chunk it up so much in a single episode. And that's been one of my problems. I've tried to record this several times because there's so much information and I'm trying to figure out how to distill it in the right way. But that this theory pretty much is a unifying theory on cognition, meaning it's how things think, how minded things work. And it's universal in that when I say minds, you notice I don't say just human minds. I'm talking about minds, even artificial ones like artificial intelligence. It uses the same mathematical principles to develop. Side note, I think it's kind of funny that we're so far ahead in this generation of artificial intelligence when we do not have a standing theory of natural intelligence, which is technically what we're talking about. This is what it is. This explains how our intelligence comes about, what it is, how it works. And the coolest part about it is once you break it down, it makes a whole lot of sense. You can see it for yourself in your daily actions. No bullshit. Serious. And I think I had mentioned a little earlier that I had difficulties in recording in this. And a part of it was I thought that it's the complexity of the idea. I keep even saying that it's a complex idea. And don't get me wrong, it's not simple. But when you really break it down, it's not really that complex. That's actually not the biggest elephant in the room. So for example, the fundamental basic idea is that the point of brains is to take in all the sensory information that's coming in, all the signals, because it's locked in a skull by itself. All these signals coming in are not labeled. It has to figure out what they mean. So the point of the brain is to predict and understand what these signals mean and maintain that, update that. That's the crudest, lowest brow way to look at it. Essentially, it makes models of the world based off the sensory information, judges based off of the sensory information to update its models. That's how it maintains. Now, obviously, I have to get into the nitty-gritty. There's a whole lot that I need to explain, but that's not really that complex right up front. Right? You might not be familiar, but the ideas of quantum physics versus classical physics, we have not been able to marry those. It's a huge hole in our modern understanding of physics. Now it's a lot harder and more complex when it comes to basic concepts that you have to kind of understand versus this. So it's not really complexity, but I was still struggling. Why is it so hard to try to go over this idea? And I came up with the largest elephant in the room. And what that is that I think I mentioned earlier that there isn't a universal theory of consciousness now. We don't operate on one. Our major fields that are out there don't have one, which I know is kind of you might be, well, how can psychology work for some people who are uninitiated? Well, they don't have a framework, a universal framework of what consciousness is and what emotions are. They have kind of loose interpretations. We'll go over that in another episode. And it's not that they're completely wrong or foolish or anything, but it's like, if this is right, there's some issues that we have to address. And then it became clear to me when I thought of that idea, and that is that this notion, as much evidence and as interesting as it is, and as much as we can see it in our own actions, the main issue for it is that it conflicts with our understandings of how we're supposed to work. And again, I know we're not sat and taught. I mean, maybe some of us in religious or parochial schools or certain others are taught like meaning and purpose and things, but the vast majority of us, just through normal public education, these aren't things unless they're talked about at home. These are not things you're taught, but they're implied throughout the totality of society. And the biggest issue with active inference and predictive processing is if it's true, which, spoiler alert, I think it is, it will conflict with a great many of the standards and norms that we run on. Free will, autonomy. I talked about mental health and therapy, which has been politicized. These things are based on different iterations and understandings of how the mechanics of emotions and beliefs and purpose and everything. If these are true, then our current standing and understanding has to be relooked at. And we already know what kind of issues that can bring up in just modern politics with how we look at it. And what I'm saying is this goes to scale at every level. Social interaction, empathy, responsibility, blame, behavior, consumer behaviors, ethics, morality. It's a game changer. If you can pause for a moment and realize, even if it's true, how difficult it would be to take a look at it. It's like trying to perform surgery on a beating heart, especially at a societal level. Truth is truth. And I think as we go through this, you'll see that understanding active inference and predictive processing as the actual framework of how you work helps even the craziest stuff make sense. Because you see where it's coming from. You're able to separate the wheat from the chaff. You're able to more objectively look at the things. And as much as the against the grain this can be, how it can conflict with ways in which we work, it also explains so many things that we have almost no explanation for, or we just go, oh, that's kind of funny. Social conformity and cohesion, the purpose of ritual, ceremony, religion, how our education system now is kind of built on just this monotonous memorization versus really building critical thinkers. It doesn't work that way. We want it to be, but if you break it down and you look, we learn in one way. We really do by interacting in an imitation, which is much more active inference than this pure memorization that we enact. Fear of the unknown, fear of darkness. We're creatures of certainty if predictive processing is true. Certainty is life. Uncertainty is death. Our pursuits of power, our nature of self. A lot of things that don't really seem to make sense start making sense. Arts, aesthetics. It goes on and on and on. But the key issue that we're going to have to get over, and I'm going to quote an old boss of mine, Rafi. He was an old car salesman who taught me, and I did car sales for years and years and years. something about teaching somebody how to, at the time I was talking about teaching somebody how to sell who had worked at another place. And I see it as such an important idea right now that I'm going to share with you. And he goes, the hardest part about teaching somebody new is not teaching the new things, new information. He goes, that's easy. It's so easy. It's unlearning the old stuff. It's unwinding what you already believe. And especially once the end of this episode and you have a basic understanding of how active inference works and predictive processing works, you then realize how absolutely, utterly important that is. Because everything you experience is based off of what you believe. It's based off of what you predict to be true, not what is true. What you have built to believe to be true. There's a bunch of implications for you personally and for us totally in that. And so as you can see, as I've prattled on here a little bit, there's some difficulties in trying to explain this idea above and beyond just the logistics and the mechanics of how it works. So I'm going to get into that right now, but for what I'm asking from you is to realize and understand that no matter what you believe, if you feel that this is a challenge and is uncomfortable, I suggest that you pause and you keep looking at it, because it's not something coming from the cosmos that you're feeling. Something's not happening to you. You are experiencing sensory information that's coming in and challenging your model of the world. And there's a couple different ways you can exist. This defines you, what you do with that signal. Do you update your model, meaning learn? Or do you do something else to silence it? Do you turn me off? Do you feel that I'm such a threat that you go on and leave nasty comments? Anything that happens, everything we do is based off of how we think. So at their core, active inference and predictive processing are actually mathematical, and they can be proven mathematically, meaning that one way to look at it, how Bayesian inference or the actual math is used to create models, is in weather forecasting. So basic idea of a weather forecast is that you have models, meaning an understanding of and a belief of how things work under certain conditions. And then when you extrapolate that, you simulate it over time, you see what happens. And when things don't go as you have planned, say a tornado forms when you weren't expecting one, you look into the data, you look into the what had happened, and as you see new processes or you adjust to update your understanding, you then update your simulation, you get better predictions. So if you were alive 40 years ago, 50 years ago, you would remember a time in which you couldn't really trust the weather very much, right? It was kind of a crapshoot. And it's more refined now, not just because of the technology, but also because of the understanding and refining of the models through this same math, Bayesian inference, predictive processing, and updating the models. And we use that in a very real way on a daily basis. Same with spam filters, as I had mentioned earlier, with active inference and some medical imaging technology that's available. These principles are used in real life things on a daily basis. And through the use of those, we're starting to explore the ideas, how they would work for us and how we're seeing it working for us. But fundamentally, active inference is suggesting that the brain, our brains, all brains, are continuously making predictions about the world, and then they take actions to minimize the difference between what they predict and the sensory input it receives. All right. So basic idea is that the core of active inference is that it's a process of reducing uncertainty, which you can also call prediction error, through both perception and action. So the fundamental idea is that when I say models, like as in when we're talking about the forecasting model, a simulation in a computer, there in some biological way, we would appear to be doing that. We are simulating these things in order to predict them. So real life example, I say 1, 2, 3, you say, most people are going to say 4. Why? Because you know you have memorized that number is in order, or that you predict that that's in order. How we find patterns so easily, it's a form of predictions, because predictions are, in a way, understanding algorithms and patterns. Much like how search engines work, that's in a way kind of how we work. That basically, most of the things that you experience have to be simulations. Why? Well, we went over the episode of perception, and we went over the idea that none of the experiences that we have are direct interpretations, direct connections to reality. They just can't be. The way you experience them would be different. You wouldn't be able to process it, timing, all of these things. Just, you wouldn't have the movie screen experience of sight. You wouldn't have the ease of it, understanding the words that are coming out of my mouth if you understand English. You wouldn't have any of these functional things without a predictive nature of perception and mind. And even though this is kind of known and discussed through even neuroscience and a lot of other circles, it's not necessarily addressed as anything as more than a subsystem. But what we're talking about is that perception, we only think in really one way, right? Our cognition works in a way. It's not that our vision works in one way, our hearing works in another, touch is something else, our sexual arousal is something else. Our vision versus when we close our eyes and we create our own visions. So what we're talking about is that it appears that things that think, how they actually think, minded things, you, me, my cat, your cat, other animals, other mammals, they work in this way of taking in sensory information, creating understandings, models, simulations, and then adjusting and existing through that. The making a simulation kind of makes sense when I talk about, or for the average person would make sense when I'm talking about models for weather. You can see the maps, the spaghetti maps of the hurricanes, right? As they go, we can think of that. But what does that actually mean for you? What does that actually mean for a normal human? Well, think about this. Think of when we're born, and especially for humans, we have quite a long while that we have to take to develop. And what I mean by that is for first few years of your life, you're pretty much more of a burden than a grace to your family. And I'm not saying that in any mean-spirited way. I'm saying, like, just logistically, it takes a whole lot more energy than the child can contribute. And not only that, it's that you don't see that much in the rest of nature, right? The period of time until adulthood for most animals is very short, even in relationship to their lifespan. But humans, we feel we're a little special, and we are able to think with a little bit more gravitas than anything else. And it would kind of make sense that it takes this extra time for us to develop. And now during that development, a lot of stuff happens. What we kind of classically think of is just the growing and the developing and the building of neurons. I'll try to throw up a couple images here of kids doing fun stuff, showing them trying to learn how their bodies work, right? If you're on the YouTube, you'll see it there. Otherwise, I'll put a link in the show notes. But basically, you'll see things like a kid struggling to use their thumbs to get thumbs up. You'll see them trying to get into clothes that are too small for them. It's a whole lot of like, man, I used to think of like all these stupid kids, right? But it's not. What this is a window to the process of growth, the development that leads to us. And for most of time, and most of how we classically think of it, we realize that we're literally building brain matter. There's new neurons that are developing. And we can see that when it goes south in privation, which is, say, you deprive the child of contact, especially during those prime developmental years, you permanently fuck the kid up. You get like a wolf child. There's stuff that you can't just simply learn. There's things that are literally built in during that development. And we kind of classically think that that's it, that brain matter, that material, those are the circuits that are firing. But what we're talking about here in active inference and predictive processing, that it's not just the hardware that's developing there. There's software, hand in hand, that is being developed with your interactions with the outside world, with people, with all of these things that are key to what makes you and your brain, literally as it physically forms, and as you make connections and understanding and develop. And when we say connections, understanding, and develop and learn, change that term to make models, contextual maps, right? That's what understanding is. That's what learning is. It's map making. You're creating contextual maps, causal maps, how things work. You're creating understandings. You're predicting things to be true and checking it against the outside world continuously. That's the biggest part of being a child, is the activity and the interaction. And this is why it's a huge part of development. And when you don't interact with them in that way, how much permanent, permanent, I don't want to say damage, but what is lost permanently that cannot be undone. And now a brief word from our non-existent sponsors. Welcome to the Guilt-Free Shopping Network, your premier destination for all of your guilt-free consumer needs. Why just shop when you can shop and save the world? Tired of feeling guilty about your carbon footprint, your social impact, your evil ancestors? With every purchase you now make, a fraction of a penny can go to a good cause, and from beyond the card you can buy directly our luxury products that are available as well. Each product indicating a cause. This diamond ring will help us plant a tree in urban sub-Saharan Africa. This designer handbag sends one whole textbook to an underprivileged blind girl in India. And if you're feeling a little overwhelmed by all the choices, our guilt-free consultants are standing by to help you select the product that will boost your social image the most. Remember, it's not about the impact. It's about the intent. So don't wait. Dial in now and make those purchases count for something, even if it's just your conscience. Because at Guilt-Free Shopping Network, we believe every little bit helps, especially if it helps you feel better about your lifestyle. And now back to our show, currently in progress. The building of models, these simulations in your mind, right? You're experiencing one now. You're hearing me. I'm not even there. You're looking around and you have an experience of a movie screen in your head that you do not have. You can break this illusion by crossing your eyes. It's not completely unreal, but it is a simulation based off of models. This is how we work, not just how we see, how we work in every aspect. You're building models when you're growing up, you're building language models. Like we already know this when it comes to artificial intelligence, these are predictive processing models using language. We do this innately. This is one of the big universal game changers between us and other animals. But as you also notice, I said things that think, and I'm talking about other animals. I own pets. If you've ever owned pets, if you ever interact with animals, have you noticed it's kind of interesting that we don't really acknowledge how we, even though we have this exceptional idea of what humanity is and how we think, that we interact with animals, that we're built of the same stuff. Our brains are built in not exactly the same way, but they're not built of completely different building blocks. They use neurons, they use connections similar to us. They use eyes, they breathe. When you get down to it, we are actually far more similar than you would think based off of how we act. But one of the great parts about active inference is it helps bridge that gap. Like this talks about how things think. Things, right? So my orange cats, they seem brainless, but I understand from social media now that that's just a trait of the breed, but we still interact with each other. We still communicate. They have created a series of vocalizations and actions that gets me to do certain behavior. They'll get treats from me. They'll get the door opened. There's a series of things that if I say or do, that will get their actions. Several of them will react to their name. If I yell out Charlie and in a certain tone, he runs to me. He has learned that. And we kind of act like that's a real funny, weird thing and how it's kind of cutesy. But we never really look at that as that this is a unifying idea of how we are much more alike than dislike. We work in fundamental ways that are far more similar than dissimilar. There's a reason that touch between a pet and people has a universal quality to it. There's aspects of just being a thinking thing that are very obvious and shared, but we don't act like they're obvious. It's kind of an interesting thing because it's right there. There's no reason we can't see this without a little bit of exploration. This also explains, again, in development, when we're talking about models and how animals are innately, like we always think of like they're built-in instincts that they're running off of these chips. And really, when you break it down, I don't know, you get to a point of being asinine because just look at the basic idea of how many videos you've seen with people with wild animals that they've raised from cubs. I'm not saying they're domesticated. I'm not saying you should go get one. But what I'm saying is that these animals are not pre-wired. They're built, right? This psychology is built through models. If they're hand-fed by a person, they can develop a relationship with a person. They're not necessarily 100% just going to eat your face. They've never worked that way, but we've acted like it's that, even though it's painfully obvious right in front of us. You hand rear a kitten or a dog, you get a very sociable animal. Perfect example. Have you ever watched any of those pet shows, right? The people with issues with their dog or their cat or whatever. 99% of the time they go there. What's the problem? It's the fucking owner. It's always the owner. They're the stupid ones. The animals are following their lead. They are not doing the things that are required to be healthy for the animal. It's always the same fucking story over and over and over again because we somehow think that it's animals' bad behavior, but it's really just us living in a narrative and not reacting to reality in an appropriate way. Spoiler alert, you're going to hear that a lot. Basically, this idea shows how things think. It shows how when we're not thinking, what we're missing. It helps unify us with other life. It helps unify us with other people. And explains that we're actively engaged to confirm these predictions, how we think the world is, right? So actions, the physical doingness of things, are not just responses to the world, but are part of a dialogue with it. Their aim is to make our sensory inputs match our predictions. You got this model that you're making, but when sensory information comes in and it is different from what you believe it to be true, there's an error signal. All right. Now, this error signal is the core of human experience. Now, you might go, what the fuck are you talking about, dude? This is a bit of a stretch. No, I'm serious. This is the core of human experience because at that error signal is where self is. That's where decisions come from. That's where, or end, right? This is where action and your sense of self meets reality. This is where the rubber hits the road, is in the signal, in the difference between what you predict and what you're experiencing. Because if it doesn't even come to signal, you won't even notice it. You're like, what? What are you talking about? All right. Right now, you're sitting, you're doing whatever, right? You're experiencing things. You have salience. The certain things come to your attention. Now, it's not magic. It's a process of working. And so you have all of the sensory signals are still going into your brain. You're only experiencing hearing me. You're not experiencing noticing the thing over in the corner. Move your left foot. Move your left foot in your shoe, right? Do you now all of a sudden experience your foot? Do you experience fabric? Do you experience movement? Do you experience other aspects of your room that you did not experience? Have you lost the experience of other things? Have you lost the ability to focus on what I'm saying? That's because of your salience. That's your system working. That's what's bringing your attention. You are existing in a fire hose of sensory information. That's what your brain does. This system gives it the pinprick of what you should pay attention to. And that's when it doesn't work. Another beautiful part of active inference is that there's a few explanations of some common conceptions of mental illness, like psychosis and autism. And I'm going to leave a link in the description. We'll have another episode later on. I would actually like to talk to some of the people who wrote this paper if you can get enough traction. They talk about the idea of psychosis and autism in relation to active inference, if that's how we work, is something called aberrant salience. You're like, what? That's kind of a scary, interesting name, right? Well, what it talks about is what your attention, what is brought to your salience, what is brought to your attention. Now, if you're just a regular person, you grow up, you develop, you do all your normal things, right? And then in your late teens, early 20s, that system of what's important, what's brought to your attention, right? Like when you hear a noise outside that's really loud and you pay attention to it, instead of that, you pay attention to a book on the shelf. You now pay attention to a fly on your leg. And it has this same sense of meaning and purpose of the loud noise, but it makes no sense. That system failing you, then your system working as normal to minimize that signal tries to create these crazy fucking explanations to offset it. You become Jesus. The windmills are listening to you. Satellites are listening to you. All this crazy stuff because that makes more sense. Why else would your sunglasses have meaning? Why else would you, in the middle of the night, be woken up and hearing whispers? These things are a reflection, or if active inference is true, that could be the reflection of psychosis. that your salience has gone kaflooey, gone nuts, gone off at a later date after it's already worked for a long period of time. And you rationally are trying to follow the normal aspects of active inference to minimize the signal, which explaining it away, you're trying to deal with the signal. Well, if you and I are sitting down and all of a sudden the trash can starts talking to you, and if we're both being rational, we experience it just as you would normally because it's the same system. There's no difference between the system of seeing and hallucination. It's the same system. It's just what's being brought in and generated. And if that system gets a little something on it where it just can't seem to differentiate anymore, and it's still raising its red flags, you're, in order to continue to exist, have to create a story to become comfortable with it. Because we're creatures of narrative. That's what active inference is indicating. Now, if when it talks about autism, so that fire hose of sensory information I talked about, that your salience is able to pick and choose what's important. Imagine if you're born and you're not able to pick and choose. During especially your prime development years, you're not able to narrow down the fire hose. Everything is coming all at once. It's overwhelming. It explains why stimming and rocking can create comfort. It can create calm. And it explains why the superior, most autistic people are superior at certain visual cognitions, like puzzles and things like that. Their nature is more difficult to narrow down all of the sensory input that they're getting. So and especially during the high developmental years, so you can still learn things, but you've missed that stage, and that would be an explanation for autism. And again, I'm not claiming I know for sure. Clearly, I'm not trying to demean anybody else and how they feel or anything. I'm just talking about, if this is true, this explains something that we already know to be true in a much more functional way, and maybe in a much more helpful way. And even in just that very loose description that I know is probably pretty crude, I think that that's a fairly compelling argument to at least take a look at. But I guess just to circle back, as I talked about the signal, right, that for example, what brings to your attention, what that unease, is that there's a new way of thinking of all of these things that you're sensing and their purpose and their meaning and where they're coming from, if you allow yourself to think and understand it and believe it to be true. So models, right? Like I talked about models of the world. You have models, you have social models. What do I mean by that? You have models of who you are, what you're supposed to do, your beliefs, your purpose, or you don't have those things filled and you feel a great deal of uncertainty about them and anxiety about them. So when I'm talking about signal, those are the experiences of that. Do you feel confidence? Well, confidence would be an affirmation that you believe what's coming from outside is affirming your view. You feel anxiety. That is the counter. That is telling you that things are not what they should be. They are uncertain. They're either against the model or putting you at risk. Now, the reality of it is, though, is that because that's true, or is that because what you believe? Do you believe that just to be true? Is that helpful, even if it was true? These are questions that I think, again, if we are able to, bit by bit, start taking in this idea of how we work, we can start handling. But I guess at its core, and we're going to really get into it in the next episode, is what do you do with this, right? Like, what does it mean? Well, like I just mentioned, social models, you have an understanding of yourself and what you do with that. So, for example, if we feel anxiety in social situations, what do? That's a signal. What do we do? Well, a lot of us do not try to enhance ourselves or change ourselves or expose ourselves to avoid or offset the anxiety. We do things to offset the signal so that we don't feel the anxiety, like not go out, create ideas and personalities and online personas, and do all sorts of things, all of our actions that when you core back down are to offset the signal. If you have an alarm, like what I'm talking about is if an alarm clock goes off, are you the person that gets up, that updates your model? Are you the person that snoozes it, that person that snoozes it until it goes off? Are you the person who turns it off? What do you do this for the signal? Do you change? Do you update? Do you learn? Most of us don't, because we don't realize that's what it is. No one has told you. And even those who have told you, usually there's an agenda in there, right? And we'll also talk about that. Take a moment, chew over this a little bit more, but take a moment and think about everything I said so far. How do you feel about that? What feeling do you have? What does that tell you about what you believe to be true? You've just practiced self-awareness. All right, we didn't have to meditate. We didn't have to do any gimmicks. We didn't have to do any music. You just paused and practiced a moment of self-awareness. And self-awareness and mindfulness, which are just more buzzwords now than anything else, but we'll try to clean those up and get them back to useful, in combination with an understanding of what these feelings are, what my senses are, what affect is, mood. Have you ever been cranky because you haven't eaten? You have the sensation of grumbling in your stomach. Where do you think that is? That's from your models of the world. That's from your models. Well, I guess you don't make models. People say you don't make models of your body, but they're from models of your sensory inputs. When your sugar is low, you have a certain experience. We think of it as mechanical. It is generated. When we think of pain, we think of it as purely physical. I'm not saying pain isn't real, but I'm saying pain is in the mind. Your experience of it is generated. I'll leave a link in the show notes. There's a well-known, when they talk about perception and pain, construction worker fell. He had a giant rebar going through his shoe. He was hauled away, screaming, acting like he was in horrible pain. And when they took off his boot, it missed him. He shouldn't have been in pain. But he experienced everything. The totality of his environment let him believe that there was pain. He experienced pain. And some people laugh at that, how silly. The reality of it is that could happen to any of us because that's how we work. We like to think of it as silly because that matches more of the narratives and the stories that are written into our world as to how we work. But they are not true. They just simply are not true. And then this is a challenge to that. This is going to be a continuing challenge to that. But for you and for me, the biggest issue is that signal, that feeling. Anytime we feel something positive means it's reinforcing. So this explains the times when you go, why would I feel good about something bad happening to an enemy? I'm a good person. That's, again, going through a narrative of how we work. It wouldn't make any sense because there is no logic there. Through the narrative of active inference, you're reinforcing your model. It's not about who you are. You are your model. Yourself is the inaction of these things, right? It's not to undermine who you are. It's to empower your physical self to stop enacting a narrative that mostly is written for you, that you imbibe and live from by taking it in without being aware that that's what's happening. I kind of feel like I'm getting into buzzkill territory, so what I'm going to try to do is do one more brief walkthrough of the idea so that we can kind of close out and let you know in the next episode, the button-up episode of the launch of Self-Generated Podcast, we're going to talk about what all this means, what you can do about it, how you can actually take this knowledge and do something with it for yourself, and how we're going to be exploring that over the duration of the podcast in practical ways for you to actually do stuff. Do real good for yourself. Not gimmicky horseshit, not behind paywall, all that. But I'm going to do one more walkthrough of the idea. At the core, predictive processing explains that your brain is generating your mind. It's doing it for the purpose of understanding the world to maintain you as a living organism. Because if you're able to predict what's going to go on, if you're able to predict what all the sensory stuff that's coming in actually means compared to what's going on out there, you're more apt to survive. You'll survive better. That's what keeps you alive. It'll keep you sustained. We actually have kind of like this 36-hour cycle that we almost continuously live in. It makes sense with active inference. It's a little weird outside of that. We'll get into it in an additional episode, but the basic idea is change blindness. Have you ever heard of that one? You don't notice the small little changes over time. Perfect examples if you have if you've been around a kid, a sibling, or anyone that you've been able to grow up with, or you yourself didn't notice yourself aging. You don't necessarily notice until you look in a mirror, and sometimes you'll have a moment where you look and you have this experience that you're far older than you thought, or that you see somebody you haven't seen in a little while and you experience them as much older than you thought. It's almost kind of shocking and surprising. That's not a funky thing. That's a product of active inference at work. That we exist in this maintaining of our 36-hour model, meaning that we don't really update for that. We don't need to. We're kind of trying to be perpetual. And that we are then surprised and we have to update our models. And so we no longer experience surprise. You know why you don't experience surprise anymore? You have updated your model. That is no longer a surprise. You don't experience a surprise anymore. Now, predictive processing explains this. And now, for a brief moment, for a word from our non-existent sponsor. Welcome to Benton and Crooked Legalish Services, now with real attorneys. We all know that we have the right to legal representation, and we also know that mostly the wealthy get the best representation, and here at Benton and Crooked Legalish Services, we believe that justice is for those that can afford it. You need witnesses? We got them on speed dial. You'd need statements of facts? We got you covered. Our one-stop legal experts can meet any need you have. Here at Benton and Crooked, we understand the beauty of experts is they only need to be experts in what they claim they know. So for the right fee, we can get any version of the story you need factually validated. At Benton and Crooked, we specialize in bending the truth and crafting the perfect outcome for our clients. It's only ever a matter of fees. With Benton and Crooked, you do not need a real case. You need a real desire to win. With your will and our fees, justice will be served. Benton and Crooked Legalish Services, where vicious meets frivolous. Come get your justice today. Flexible finance options available. And now back to the show. But what about if you still were surprised? People don't remain surprised. Why? Because they do something with the signal. Either you update your model, meaning you learn, or you do something else to offset the signal. So as we develop models of the world, we learn different things. So when I say models like of your body, have you ever been around a little kid with that was throwing up for the first time? Now, I don't feel so good. And then they magically somehow all seem to figure out how to puke entirely on them fucking selves every single time. Just like clockwork. And this was another one of those, man, a stupid fucking kid idea that I had, that I thought, that I now realize is that they don't know. They don't have a model of what that sensory information of the stomach not feeling good is. They just know something's up. And that's why they don't bend over. They don't know. But then in subsequent incidents, they act differently. They become, in some cases, afraid of it because of the unpleasantness and the uncertainty of the experience. And again, it's not just a stupid kid didn't know, it's that they had never been exposed to it, even though it's something from inside. Because it's not hardwired, it's built, it's a model that if you don't experience, you don't get. If you don't just read a book and learn how to ride a bike. These things you have to experience. And so now that if you get that experience, that kid who you puked on themselves, I was one of them, right? Now, after also years of heavy drinking, I know what that sensation means. I then act accordingly. I will do things otherwise that will offset it. My actions, that if I'm starting to feel that with my stomach and I get up and I go to the bathroom, what am I doing? I'm closing the prediction that I'm going to be sick. How often have we actually predicted we've done something and then enacted it? Like I'm starting to feel sick, I start noticing I'm sick, and we enact it and we actually create ourselves to vomit. That also happens. Why? Not because of a fluke, but because of predictive processing. We're enacting models. We're enacting our understanding of what reality is. And when I physically do something, it's an extension of that. None of my actions, conscious or otherwise, are outside of this scope. It's all within this purview. And the most important aspect of it is the signal, the error signal, the prediction error. Because that's the core of our experience and the most important aspects of our experience. So, for example, I was a raging alcoholic. What I'm claiming and what I'm saying is I'm not cured or anything, but what I experience, I don't experience the same level of anxiety and pain and all these other things that what I used was a maladaptive strategy of alcohol to quiet the signal. So to offset the signal, I worked to understand where it was coming from. The trepidations I had, all of the issues I had. I had made a fucked up version of myself trying to answer the signal, not realizing what it was. I used layers of narrative. I used off-the-shelf self-help strategies. I used all sorts of things that fundamentally never got me to a healthy place up until understanding that these things I was experiencing weren't happening to me. There wasn't something from the cosmos. It wasn't helpful for me to beat myself up. I was able to find out healthy strategies to change my mind, to change my fundamental nature, to become more comfortable with being uncomfortable. And then I found that my resistance was the greatest part of my problem in life. I was creating a lot of my own problems. I was creating almost all of my own problems. But I couldn't see that. I couldn't see that because I was dancing within these feelings that I didn't know what they were. But understanding through active inference that the signal is telling me something is against what I believe is true. If it's a negative, strong thing, that's what it's saying. If it's positive, it's telling me that there's something a lot about that I'm reinforcing. I want more of that. If it's something that I don't necessarily like, well, I got to look at that just as much as the anxiety. And it's not about ridding it. These are working systems. You're not supposed to control emotions. You don't control really much of anything. You're supposed to understand what they mean, what they really mean for you to then have an impactful effect on your life, an impactful effect on these sensations, your models, updating and changing how you experience the world. It's a long, long fucking process. It took me a while. And there's shortcuts. There's all sorts of things. There's meditation and all that, but we're not going to get into that for a long time. All it is just a regular person sitting down and realizing that a lot of the shit that they're consuming is not in their best interests. Not because somebody told them that, because they can see it for themselves. The reason we live in a world full of fake news and fake everything is because we are driven fundamentally as creatures by the understanding and belief that we experience the world as it is, 100% as reality, and we don't. It's not that we don't experience reality at all. The fact of jumping to a black and white notion is an aspect of active inference as well. It's biological imperative to minimize and err on the side of caution. It saves so much cognitive power. I get it, but we are capable of thinking in far more complex ways than the simple it's this or it is not. Society has built a lot of understandings and logics and all sorts of things that we look out at and we go, well, shit, they got to have figured it out. Everything's good. They know. Systems got to know. It doesn't. It works because we all make it work. And if you want to, we'll get into the nitty gritty of this later, but if you go, oh, it's made up things, that's not true, Steve. What are you talking about? You just make stuff up and it just works. Well, what do you think money is? Money only works because we just all act like it works. This is a core aspect of how we work. And fundamentally, as we explore active inference, as we explore predictive processing, as we look at the way we work and how you can see it for yourself in the daily interactions, in your own experiences, in your experiences with your friends, your family, in your experiences at work, in your experiences out and about, and how you see media, and how you see the world, and how we explore the history of other things, it will become clearer. And if you're just willing to not resist it, the truth will show itself to you. You don't have to do anything special. You don't have to make any oath. You don't have to pay any bill. You don't have to do anything much more than take the time, do the work, and be willing. And it's actually not as hard as you think. But there's barriers. Most of them are in ourselves. We have to fix those before we can even fucking think of fixing any of the ones out here. Honestly. Do you think it's kind of funny that for year after year, decade after decade, it's the same silly arguments again and again, around and around, no matter where you go? Well, we're going to explore that. We're going to explain that in a way. And I think active inference will enlighten you not just to yourself, but to your world, to our world, our real no bullshit world that you and I are actually living in right now. I'm not fucking AI, neither are you. And there's a lot more control we can have in our world if we realize what it actually is and how to actually manage it. And spoiler alert, we live at a time where that knowledge, that power is the most important it has ever fucking been. Ever. Because here's the reality. Right now, as we speak, or as I speak, as you listen, there are billions of dollars at play to create versions of human intelligence that make us look like ants, that are going to be very capable, that are going to show us ways to do things and be commercial and do all sorts of amazing things that fundamentally will not be allowed to, or will not allow our current systems to continue. And many, many other challenges. The fact that our current systems probably aren't working that well as is. All of these things, we can look at it through the lens of active inference and predictive processing and find new ways and new paths. But first, it starts with us. Because fundamentally, active inference works in one way. And if you cannot believe this to be true, you will not experience it. You will not give a shit. You will not do anything. And you won't be able to experience if this is true unless you're willing. So I can do as much as I can, and I'm going to do my best, especially in this next episode, to kind of bring it all home as to what you can do for yourself, what this means for you, what this means for us, and how we can actually see and know things on a daily basis, and to skip the pomp and circumstance and bullshit and get straight to the nitty-gritty. But fundamentally, if I am the most amazing fucking thing in the world, which I'm not, if I explain it perfectly, unless you are willing, it doesn't fucking matter. Because how we handle the signal, that discomfort of something that challenges what we know, defines us. I know how I've been able to alter it. Let me show you. Self-Generated Podcast.